Hello and welcome to the Astro Garden, a place for astrologers to chat all things astro. I'm your host Janessa of By Jove Astrology. Thanks for tuning in. All right, welcome to our next episode of the Astro Garden podcast. I have Freyja Morgan here with me today. Freyja, hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Freyja is someone whose work I've admired for a long time now and didn't realize until recently, like that when we connected, that we were in the same Nightlight Year 2 class. So it's pretty fun to get
That was
connected.
so funny, wasn't it, when we realised?
Yeah.
Hello, where do we know each other from? Oh, right. We didn't even know that we knew each other.
Right. Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and your work before we dive in?
Yeah, so I'm Freyja. I've been practicing astrology for just as long as I can remember. I have been doing it in a kind of more professional way since 2020. As I think is the same for a lot of people when we were during that kind of big pandemic time. Some people had more time at home to kind of like reflect and think about what they were doing. And at that point, I decided that I could no longer hide the fact that I had this astrological upbringing, because my mum is an astrologer and I was surrounded by astrology all my life. And, I had a young child at the time and, was soon to get pregnant with another child. And it was a very kind of like, I think when you're pregnant, there's something really weird and mystical that's going on, kind of in your soul and things like that. Anyway, there was this massive transformation, which I'm sure we can like link to the transits at some point. And I was just like, I can't hide that this is part of my life anymore. And I kind of like came out. It was a bit like a rebirth moment. And I came out and I was just like, I'm just going to start offering this out as like, as a kind of nurturing tool for other people, where we can kind of work through whatever they're going through at the moment and kind of connect it to the planets and kind of see what's going on and, start playing around with astrology. And now, after a few years of just kind of like being brave and taking the next step, now I offer one-to-one readings, which I absolutely love. And I've just started doing one-to-one tuition as well, which is really exciting. That is my absolute passion, is trying to break astrology down into bite-sized pieces to make it make sense for people. And I think I feel like astrologers are here to be kind of translators of what all these symbols and signs mean. It's a bit like reading a sheet of music. Like if you don't understand, whatever that's called, sheets of music, then, if you can read it, you can kind of translate that into something for somebody else. You can translate that into the music. So as astrologers, I think we kind of translate what the music of the stars is saying and share that out to other people. And my absolute passion is trying to make it as digestible as possible so that it doesn't just sound like jargon, so that it actually makes sense and you can relate it to your life on a day-to-day basis. I'm doing the tuition and I'm slowly starting a group, but that is kind of like morphing as time goes by. And I was going to time it with the big Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, but I'm just kind of like, I think that the one-to-one tuition feels a little bit more in sync with my own life at the moment with young children. So we're going with that for now. And the group will kind of slowly begin to expand. But I love going on social media, sharing about different transits and just chatting astrology with anybody that's interested in listening.
Nice. Yeah, your social media is great. I love how just authentic you are and, sharing so much of yourself and, what it is to be an astrologer and a mom and all the things you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's funny. Like, I think so many of the people that I connect with online are actually parents themselves. And like dealing with that juggle. And it's amazing. Like when I finally realized that connection, because I don't know that to begin with, I'm like, oh, okay. So it is like, sharing about regular stuff and I can't help but be authentic. So I'm like, I've just got to be honest about this. And it's like so nurturing for me as well to have that connection with other people. I really love people. I've always worked in like people, people-centered careers, like in cafes and stuff like that, because I just love knowing like what's your story, what makes you tick, like what things have you found hard in life, all that kind of stuff, because I'm an Aquarian, and I think we learn through connecting with other people and sharing our own stories and other people's stories for the world to make sense a bit more.
Yeah. I can't help think of because you keep using the word nurture. I can't help but think of the Cancer placement too. It's like screaming with the mom.
Is it? It's just coming out.
Yeah.
I've got a really like mum colour on as well. I'm like really neutral and my hair all bouncy, like like I want to give the world a big hug. But then sometimes that crab shell comes up, and I'm a bit like, I've got to hide from the world. But luckily today is not one of those days.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming out for us.
Yeah. I like peep out of the shell. I should have worn a spell. Like maybe one day we could do like performance art astrology. Do you know,
Totally.
actually, I did that once. I went to this astrology camp. So when I said that my background is like astrology, my mum's an astrologer. And when I was like, I don't know, maybe 14, like quite a formative time in my life, my mum took me to this astrology camp, and it was an eclipse. So I think it was 1999 actually. And she took me to this eclipse camp in the UK and where we live. And what was I saying? Oh yeah, they were offering this astro drama. And at the time I was just like, I've always wanted to be like on the stage and be a performer. And I like jumped in and I picked up this thing, and you like have these different like glyphs, like wooden carved glyphs. And I think I picked up one for Neptune. I was like, yeah, I just want to have fun. And everyone was like, I don't think you quite understand like what's going on. And then somebody very kind, very nurturing, probably a Cancerian, came over and was like, no, I can see that like Neptune would want to have fun. And I was just like, it would be really fun to have another go at doing that kind of thing now that I am officially out about being an astrologer.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I could see you doing that, or like running a similar production or something for kids.
Yeah,
cool.
That would be so much fun, wouldn't it? Like, yeah, kids understanding their own like zodiac signs and their birth charts. I think that's like definitely something in the future that I would really like to help. I don't know, it's an awkward one with kids, isn't it? But like, you don't want to give them too much information too early because it's a bit overwhelming. But at the same time, like growing up with it myself, I have on reflection always found it helpful. So yeah, maybe it's indirectly or something, like feeding in a bit of that information.
Yeah.
But it's definitely useful. Like, don't you find that as a parent that if you know your child's birth chart, it is just such a relief. It helps you take a breath. You're like, it's okay. They've got a Taurus moon. I know they're going to find it hard to let go. I know they're going to find this transition difficult, or, they've got a Sag moon and they haven't even turned back when they've just run into school. And I'm like, oh, me. And they, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's super helpful. It's hard. It's a fine line for me. I feel like too, it's hard I try to like avoid looking at their charts too much, but I think like you're saying with like the simple, like, oh yeah, like there's a big transit, or the archetypes of their big three is just like in general, that's like a super good way of like reframing, like, oh, my Aries moon child is angry today.
And it's like finding ways to help them express their emotions, because for me, I'm a lot of water and earth in my chart, and so I need to like cry as a Cancer rising, and I need to kind of like, I don't know, feel my environment around me. Whereas like when you've got like a fire moon, you just need like action and expression. And it's like, that's been such a learning curve for me that like sometimes my kids don't want to hug. They want to go outside and stamp around and pretend to be a dinosaur or something like that, which is just like so different to what I needed as a child, where I was like, I'm just going to go and hide in my bedroom and, read a book or something. It's just like so different. But even just like working with the elements, I think that's probably a really useful thing, isn't it? When you're just getting to know astrology, or you're thinking about your children, is just knowing what elements that they predominantly have in their charts, like fire, earth, air, and water. and then knowing, okay, so I need to communicate in an emotional way, or I need to communicate in a mental way that gets them thinking, or I need to communicate through going out into nature, or through, you know, running around in a park, you know, like all these different ways of helping them understand the world around them without being like, hey, you've got an Aries moon, or, you know, you've got Taurus rising, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, the element, that's a really good way of looking at it that I haven't totally grasped. But yeah, I love that. That's like, that's a good approach.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about you getting to grow up or or growing up with your mom being an astrologer. Can you just talk more about what that was like and if she practices, or, you know, I'm
Yeah.
just so curious. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's you know, for years, especially as I was like becoming a teenager, I think, like when I started high school, I was just like, oh my God, my mum would, like, whenever my friends came for sleepovers, my mum would always be like, oh, so what star sign are you? And I'd be like, Mom, like it was the most embarrassing thing in the world. And now I find myself trying to find out that same information about my children's friends, a bit more indirectly than that, unless they're keen to learn about it, you know, and I've got their parents' permission and everything. But yeah, so it was always around me. Like my mum, I think she was just like, have so many books, like always, books by the bed, books in the living room, books in the kitchen, and there was always information around us. So like me and my mum are both Aquarius suns, and we kind of have similar charts in that she's you know, a water rising sign, so am I. We've both got water moons, and quite a lot of Scorpios. So there's like always been this kind of like connection between us, like on a kind of subconscious level, and we are good friends. Like we do communicate a lot and spend time together, and so she was always talking about it, and even though I was trying to reject it quite a lot, I did feel like on the inside that actually it made a lot of sense. I just didn't want to necessarily commit. And I also think that's like an important thing to say, is that my sun is in the 8th house and it's in Aquarius. So it's in like a tricky house, and it's in a tricky sign for the sun to be in. And I think when we were growing up and like reading horoscopes and stuff, if, you know, if I tried to research it myself to try and understand a bit more, I was reading stuff that didn't really make much sense. And like, you know, since taking on the Hellenistic, like the ancient astrology study, you know, my mind has just been blown, because it's like the 8th house doesn't have a line of aspect or a line of sight. It doesn't communicate well with the 1st house. It's very kind of disconnected. So like all of my water planets connect really well to my like Cancer rising, like my Pisces moon and my Scorpio stuff all makes a lot of sense to me. Whereas that Aquarius stuff has always been a bit little like like far reach away, and I can see some of it, but I can't see much of it. So I think I used to think like, oh, I don't know if astrology works for me, you know. And then I think you kind of grow into your chart. Like, I don't know what you think about this, but sometimes like, yeah, your chart at one point in your life, you know, looks so different, doesn't it? Because you've got different experiences going on. Even if you don't know about the transits, you just, things start to pop out at different times. And I do think that that's quite like divine timing. Like, okay, now you're going to learn about secondary progressions, and now you're going to learn about zodiacal releasing, and it all kind of comes at the right time. So definitely when I started the Hellenistic study, like just a few years ago, that really helped me grasp the concept more of why my Aquarius sun didn't necessarily make sense. And yeah, so anyway, so there was a lot of that going on. I didn't understand the Aquarius archetype very much within myself. And the sun is like the whole life path, right? Isn't it? You know, it's not just like when you're young, you're very much your moon. And that definitely made a lot of sense to me. But I mean, the moon does rule my chart. So, you know, that adds to it. But you're much more like just kind of going from your gut instincts and kind of functioning. And then you kind of start thinking about, what is this life path that I'm on? What's the journey, which the trajectory, which is what the sun's all about, right? And I think if you've got a sun in a tricky house and it's is it detriment? Is that right? The technicalities. So the Leo sun is dignified. and the Aquarius sun is detriment. Yeah. Meaning that it's relying on Saturn to kind of really try and shine bright, and Saturn is like anything but shining bright. And so I think if you've got a Saturn ruled sun, maybe your sun starts to make sense later on in life as well, because Saturn values that process of time and like the things that we earn over, you know, it likes growing up, you know, it's like a coming of age thing, isn't it? So my sun definitely makes more sense now. Yeah, so that didn't make a lot of sense when I was growing up. But this thing with my mum is that, yeah, you know, she used to take us to these like hippie camps, and there was always astrology themes and stuff everywhere. And it always felt like I had this very alternative like upbringing, and I didn't want anyone to know about it because I just wanted to fit in, like very un-Aquarian. I just wanted to fit in at school. I wanted to have like the same trainers as everybody else, and I just wanted to be comfortable and not like stick out. Yeah, and she, like, people would go off on their holidays somewhere abroad, and we'd go to like a camp in the UK, in the country that we live in, and I'd just be like, oh my god, this is so weird. And then I think as I got a bit older, like kind of maybe 16, some of my friends would start to be like, oh, I really like your mum, I really love it when she tells me these things. And I'm like, okay, I can like let my guard down a bit. I've got some like good friends now that I like and trust, and you know, all those Scorpio planets are like, can I trust you? Can I trust you? And yeah, one of my best friends like really liked the stuff my mum used to talk about, and so that really kind of helped me like understand that it was like relevant to other people, as well as just like this little microcosm of like me and my mum, and perhaps my mum's friends as well, because she has a lot of astrologer friends. Yes. And then like, you know, lots of heartbreak experiences as I was growing up. And whenever I was kind of in those deep, dark places of like, oh my God, I'm absolutely bereft that this relationship hasn't worked out. And what does it mean about me? And my mum would always like come into my room and like give me a book and be like, I'm just going to leave this here. And I'd be like, oh yeah, okay. And then she'd leave and I'd be like, well, I'm really depressed and I don't want to think about life, so I'm just going to like look at this book. And I would just like devour the book. It was always so amazing. And as the books got kind of more technical and things got more accurate, I think she started off by giving me like Parker's Astrology. Like, do you know that one? It's a bit like a kind of encyclopedia, isn't it?
Yeah, that was my first purchase. Yeah.
yeah, an absolute classic. And then, you know, I used to see ephemerises or ephemerides, whatever they're called, around the house. And my mum's was always like broken, torn, you know, because she'd used it so much. And I'd be like, this thing is like really intimidating because it's just, you know, it's full of like mathematical information, isn't it? It's just like, yeah. And it's all, for anyone that doesn't know what one is, but it's just, you know, it's all of the technical information of what the stars are doing in the sky right now. And like in the history as well. And so I'd look at those and just be like, oh, this is really overwhelming. And at parties, she'd be like, okay, let me just get out my ephemeris. And I'd be like, what is she doing? Like, what is this? Do people really want to know what this is about? And it turned out people did really like hearing about themselves. And that was something that I grew up with, was that people love to know about themselves. And I was like, that is really like interesting and very true. And I think naturally I'm quite shy, and I always was at like first school, like early on in education. People don't necessarily like think that about me now, but I think that's because I've learned that, like, you know, let me ask about you, you know, let me make it about you. And I kind of, I'm fascinated by people, so I always want to know about the people around me. And yeah, like really interesting. What was I saying? Yeah, reading the books. And then so one of my favorite bits was like when I was pregnant with my first son, obviously like not living at home by that point. I was 30 something, and I had a really bad like physical ailment going on, and I was on crutches from 6 months till the end of the pregnancy, and I was just like, I'm in so much physical pain, like 24/7. And I can't live my life knowing this pain's going to continue. And I read this book, which I'd read before, but you know how different bits stand out at different times in your life. and it was all about the progressed moon, by Darby Costello. I think it's called The Moon, the book. And I had the progressed moon in Taurus at the time, and it was coming up to my natal Chiron. And I was like, oh, Chiron's the wounded healer. This is really interesting. And like, I started really going on this journey of like unpacking, well, what does this transit really mean for me? What are the Taurus elements, and what are the Chiron elements, and what's the progressed moon element? And the thing was, from that experience, I knew that on the day of my son's birth, the progressed moon was exactly conjunct my Chiron.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, but do you know what? That means it's going to go away.
Yeah.
And that gave me so much hope. I can't even explain it. And I don't know if it was a self-fulfilling prophecy or what, but I was just like, that's magic. And I needed that hope to know that the pain was going to go away, because it was really difficult to live with. And yeah, as soon as I had him, like, I got up. I mean, obviously the absolute slap in the face of becoming a mum for the first time was there, but the physical pain was going. And I was just like, oh, thank God the astrology was right. And wow, what is this progressed moon thing? This is fascinating. Yeah. And so my mum, like, she's never kind of officially practiced. She's never kind of done it for work. It's more of like a kind of, she will share it with friends, and with other people that are interested in learning. And then I'm much more like, well, I got all these like cardinal angles, right? So I'm like, I need to like make this into it, all this Capricorn energy. I need to make this into a business. I need to make this as like, you know, my life's kind of thing. I need to put some structures in around it. And ever since I've been like following that path of like doing astrology as my career, things kind of keep like stacking up in the right way. And I feel like, you know, the universe kind of keeps guiding me in, like, keeps encouraging me to kind of carry on with it, which is really exciting. And I think me and my mum have done a couple of readings together in the last few years, which has been like amazing.
Yeah.
I always call her the Oracle. And it's so nice because her, you know how it is when you work with other astrologers, everybody's got their own particular interest. And so there's always more conversation to be had. It's exciting. You know, and you know, since I got into the Hellenistic astrology, for me, it's all about the timing techniques. I just love them. I think they're fascinating. Whereas for her, it's much more about the natal sort of makeup of somebody, you know, like you might feel like this in this situation, or, you know, in this life area, you might express in this way. Whereas I'm like, ooh, let's see when the thing might happen, you know, like following the breadcrumbs and the timelines to extract, some insight, really personal insight for self-development.
That's so cool. I'm curious about your mom with her studies. Like, do you know like where she learned it from, or was it passed down to her?
So actually it was so the women in my family have always been quite kind of witchy, and so there's definitely this kind of undercurrent of like intuitive psychic stuff that just kind of sits there, which always terrified me until I was about 30, I must be honest. And I think the astrology helps me rationalize some of those experiences, which otherwise can feel a little bit overwhelming. But I feel like with the astrology, I can like put it down to like some factual mathematics, you know. But yeah, so when she had my brother, who's older than me, she then got her first astrology book. And so it's a similar kind of story, really, not at all intentionally, but she would just start reading as much as you can when you've got young children, and always absorbing information. So she's self-taught. And then for years, she would say like, oh, you know, if I wanted to study this properly, I'd have to move to America because it was such a big thing in America. And I just don't think there were any courses in the UK. It was all a bit, you know, we didn't have the right connections. We didn't know about like the faculty in London, for example, and, you know, a couple of other, I think there's a couple like maybe Astrological Association. I don't know, is that English or anyway, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's not much, it wasn't huge in the UK at that point.
There was no internet, so it wasn't like a thing where you can just Google it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the year before I started studying with our teacher, the teacher that you and I share, she started studying with Nightlight Astrology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she got
Oh,
into the Hellenistic thing, and I felt like I got like a year's preview because she would tell me about, oh, this happened in class today and this happened. And I started listening to the astrology podcast. And because I'm like a cleaner, I'll go out and have headphones in when I'm cleaning in people's houses. And I would just start like devouring all that information. So in that year was crazy. I think like Jupiter was going through Pisces, I think, which is where my moon is, in my 9th house of astrology. And I was just like taking it in at any given moment, reading about it whenever I could, and just talking with people online about it. And then, so she did the first year, and then she's like, I think you'd love it. I think you should do it. And it took me so long because, I've got Mercury in Capricorn. So like, it takes me a while to assimilate stuff. And I was like, yeah, no, I think I can see the benefit of Hellenistic astrology. I do want to do this. So then I signed up for the same course. And then she was in year 2 and I was in year 1.
nice.
And it was difficult because I was frustrated because I was like, I kind of feel like year 1, I've now got that in my mind because I backed up those studies with a lot of like the astrology podcasts and other different webinars and stuff that I signed up for with like Melanie Reinhardt, for example, and Astrology University, and just doing like random bits and bobs. And then and then she was doing year 2, and I was like, oh, that's the bit I really want to do. But it was actually really useful to kind of slow things down and take that first year and just kind of really embed the basics of it's a jump, isn't it? I mean, did you learn Hellenistic as your starting point in astrology, or did you learn psychological astrology beforehand? How did it work for you?
Yeah, I started right off the bat with the Hellenistic. I think Nicholas was my first, introduction, and she does use a little bit of modern, but mainly I think she studied with Demetra George and
oh wow, yeah.
So I started with the whole signs, and then that really naturally led
well, and I think like that was a huge thing for me because mine was all like modern psychological up until about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a huge like decoding, coming back from, the houses equals the signs and all that kind of stuff. And going to whole sign houses really blew my mind. I was just like, I can't handle this. And now I find it really difficult when people want to work like in other house systems. And I'm like, no, but like this is, because Hellenistic's much more stoic, isn't it? And it's much more fate-based. And, I'll be honest, like for a year or so, I had like a definite existential crisis of like, oh my gosh, what does it all mean? And once I started to see that like there's so many I would track my transits and I would see like there's so many different ways that things can play out, that I was like, yeah, this is more exciting because it's fate-based, it's much more like, this particular area of your life is always going to be accentuated in some way. You can't necessarily tell how, but, you can see that at some point something big will happen here. And and it's been so helpful for me, when I said earlier that like my mum would give me a book if I was going through like a relationship breakup or something like that. I've got most of my stuff is in like the 5th and the 7th house. And so I feel like relationships and children are always going to be my biggest, lessons. Because the most kind of karma is happening there, right? Like the most planets are in those houses. And that for me really helps because I'm like, okay, when I get on these like crazy ideas of like, right, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to be like an author, and then I'm going to go off and do this and I'm going to go and do that. And like just recently I've been like, yeah, but let's kind of bring it back to the chart, because like I don't have loads of stuff going on in the 3rd house. I don't actually have any planets in the 3rd house, which is much more like an area where I would think that would be like somebody who's a writer, who's going to write a book, who's going to share information with people. And even this idea that I was talking earlier about having an astrology group, I love the idea of being in a group, but kind of more in a kind of friendly sharing way than it being like a business model thing. But when it comes to one-to-one work, I just love it. It gets me really excited, and I feel like that is the real kind of juice for me. And so the idea of doing the one-to-one tuition, like, that makes a lot of sense. And that, you know, I've got all these planets in the 7th house, which is much more that place of like one-to-one, isn't it? Whereas like groups would be much more having a bunch of planets, like your Mercury, Venus, Jupiter and Neptune. I've got all those planets in Capricorn in the 7th house. If I had those all in the 11th house, then maybe like groups would just feel much more like my thing, you know, as a teaching thing. But yeah, I think that 7th house, I see how much it's the one-to-one work, as well as, you know, long-term relationships, you know, marriage partner, that kind of thing. And I think it's funny because, who is it? Like Chris Brennan on the Astrology podcast is always saying, like, for astrologers, we're always kind of getting back as much as we're giving in a consultation. Like, we're always learning, aren't we? And that 7th house being that house of like projection and kind of learning through another, that you don't necessarily recognize yourself, but through the kind of the conversation between the 1st and the 7th house, it's like, oh, I can learn so much about myself in that 1st house through this connection with other in that 7th house. And that for me is like the really exciting bit.
Yeah. That's so cool. I can't help but think right now too, with the Mercury retrograde in Aries in your 11th, and you're like rethinking these groups.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you probably know, but
well, that's the thing. Like, so in the whole sign, the Mercury retrograde is in my 10th, but the Jupiter Uranus is going to be in my 11th. And that was the thing. I was like, you know, Jupiter being teachers, Uranus being like, you know, those, you know, huge insights and downers. I think Uranus is quite good for a teacher in terms of like the kind of the multitude of information that you can share with people. Although it's a bit scatty. It's exciting as well. And that was in my 11th, and I was just like, this is a group, this is brilliant, this is my community. But I've also got my Chiron in the 11th house in Taurus, and I think that's part of the story here for me. I'm still trying to unpack it, but you know, it's, I don't know, sorry, I'm suddenly thinking about like all the different transits and stuff going on now as well. But it's going to make a trine to my Mercury at 22 degrees of Capricorn in my 7th house. And I'm kind of like, yeah, that, you know, that divine inspiration of like teaching and exciting like information. And, you know, Uranus is quite astrological. It's happening over there in the 11th group, but it's like in the 11th house, sorry, but it's shining that ray of a trine aspect to my Mercury in the 7th, which is much more like, you know, Mercury in Capricorn, this is what I've been working for, this is what I've been building up to, you know, that kind of thing, the one-to-one connection. Whereas the Chiron in the 11th house is still a bit like, oh, I don't know if I can do this for like a material exchange, you know. It's like, it's so tricky to unpack Chiron, isn't it? Like, I mean, do you work with Chiron yourself?
I haven't much with clients. I keep it very high level, if at all, you know. If it's something prominent, then maybe. But yeah. I find it, I think because I had that transit with the progressed moon going over my car, and I just saw it so much, and it was definitely connected to like my financial situation at the time, and like material resources, and the fear that there might never be enough of the material resources. And I think like I always connect that now to like my experiences of like my 11th house. And it's a strange one to unpack, but I do find Chiron to be really, an interesting like addition. Like, do you use any like asteroids or something, like, but you keep it like to the main 7, or do you put the outers in? Yeah, I do the outers, but I haven't incorporated anything else yet. I'm kind of like sitting with that for now. And
but it's like there's so much time to learn so many things, isn't there? And like add in bits and take. I just recently started putting series in again, because I was like, oh, you know, our teacher was like, you know, just work with the 7, the traditional 7. And I was like, oh my god, I can't not look at Pluto. And then I was like, no, it's good to not look at Pluto. And then it's really interesting that like you can still get the same delineations without Pluto there. And now I feel like, because year two's like nearly completed, and I'm like, I'm just going to start chucking this stuff in and see what the additional layers are. But that's, yeah.
I mean, and in particular, like in 2024, it's really hard to not incorporate those outers. I mean, we've got Pluto and Uranus, crazy stuff. So it's like, I feel like I would be if I were not incorporating that with clients, to be like, I mean,
I mean, that huge shift of Pluto and Aquarius, having been in Capricorn for such a long time, and now moving into this, this 20-year span. Like, which house is it for you?
For me, it's just gone into the 12th.
In the 12th, yeah. So we've both got it in a tricky house. It's just gone into my 8th.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like I try and see the positive on everything. Like, I try and be realistic about things, but I also try and see the positive. And I feel like the 8th and the 12th are very intuitive spaces, aren't they? And they can be tricky houses, but there's light and dark with all of the houses. And I just think, like, as you get to know them more, and kind of like, it's like different rooms in your house, isn't it? Like, the more time you spend in that room, the more you can see that there's kind of comfort to be had from all of them, or insight, or whatever it is that you're trying to kind of get out of your life, what you want to experience. Like, there's something really nurturing about those houses, be them kind of more positively felt or more like difficultly, you know what I mean? Felt in a more difficult way. But it is funny, because since Pluto went into Aquarius this year, after last year's little dabble, I've had like some really funny, very literal connections to the idea of like this life and the next. And like, I went to a cleaning job recently, and I was about to go in through the front door, and the neighbor next door had sadly passed away, and the builders were in clearing the place out. And it smelt like fire, and there was a lot of smoke, but there wasn't actually a fire burning. And all of a sudden, this dust, like, I don't know how it came out of the house, but it was almost like it was attached to a chute, and it just kind of all like bellowed out of the house right into my face. So this is like, I don't know how else to put it. It's like, that's Uranus and Sagittarius, but like dead person dust, like just all over my face. I was like basically breathing it in, and I put my bag up to try and protect myself, because I had to get into this door next door, and I was literally choking on the dust of a whole lifetime from this neighbor's house. And I was like, and I just had a conversation 10 minutes before that, when I'd gone to grab a coffee, and I tied my bike up outside, and I was having 2 minutes to just like calm, and because it's quite physical doing the cleaning, so I was like, just have a rest. And this woman came, and I was like, oh, hello, and she was very friendly, and she just parked her bike next to mine, so we were like undoing the locks. And I was like, oh, how are you? She's like, yeah, I'm okay, I've just been to a funeral actually. And she was like, yeah, it was really lovely actually. And it's really starting to make me understand that, I've definitely got almost like an auto cue of like, what do you say when someone's just been to a funeral, or what do you say if someone's just passed away? And actually, it doesn't work like that. There isn't an auto cue. It's very individual. People all experience these things differently, and I can't just assume that it's a really horrendous thing that's happened. I'm starting to learn that, I don't know, this lifetime, the next lifetime, it's so much more than kind of, because I've been so fear-based around it all, around that 8th house, and the idea of like, transitional spaces, that I've never really looked at it. And now I feel like I'm gradually like dipping a toe in and learning more about it. And it feels like the universe is definitely like, here you go, this is a good thing to look at for you,
That's so literal.
In less literal ways as the time goes on. But
I was not expecting that story. That's great.
No, sorry. Feel free to edit it out. Oh my god, it was just so surprising, and I couldn't help but laugh, because I was just like, what? Like, when does this happen? Like, who experiences this? This is so weird.
Totally.
I'm just trying to access my job here, and this is right here.
Mhm.
and it's in me, you know. It was really odd. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting, especially with your son there too. That's
Mm.
very much a big transit for you, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so my son's like late 13 degrees, so I've got maybe like 7 years ish
Yeah.
until Pluto's actually there. But it's funny because there's quite a lot of people in my life that have had Pluto go over their sun,
Mhm.
you know, that have been through these transformational places. And you know, I always feel like not everybody's going to get a Pluto transit. Well, not everyone's going to get Pluto like conjunct the sun in their
Right.
lifetime, because it takes Pluto so long to go around, doesn't it? But I am one of those people that believes we're kind of like come into this lifetime to learn what it is that we're here for, and you're given the chart to kind of deal with those situations. Yeah, so it feels like a deep moment. You know, I definitely reflect and think, well, there's probably quite a few people in my life that may pass during this 20-year period, you know, like aging parents, grandparents, all of those kinds of things, which can feel kind of overwhelming. But then it's almost like, you know, you get a face full of like dust that's like 80 years old, and you're like, it's actually just all part of the process. Like, this is part of life, you know.
Mhm.
And that gives me goosebumps when I think about it. It's definitely something that is like, me and my mum obviously talk about astrology all the time, and it's definitely a conversation that we have got on repeat at the moment.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot too with the Pluto transits about what house it's leaving and like
Yeah.
those stories kind of like, wrapping up. Not that there's not going to be more transits there, but like the big
Yeah.
themes, and how that might feel really good for a
Oh,
lot of people to be like, okay, we're done with that big
yeah.
chapter.
I
But
mean, I really like the way that you talk about that, because like when we've like had discussions and like, you know, you did a reading for me, it's like just saying like, wow, I bet you're kind of relieved that that's kind of, you know, done in your seventh house. And I was just like, yeah, I am. But I really feel like you've just managed to kind of honor that moment for me, because it felt so big, and having like so many planets in my seventh house, in Capricorn, sorry. Um, it was probably one of the biggest times of my life over the last 16 years now, whilst Pluto was going through Capricorn. And I can link it all back now, but I wish that I'd known about timing techniques 16 years ago, because I
yes.
think that would have really helped me clarify a lot of what was going on, and made me kind of, you know, I don't know that it would have like stopped periods of like poor mental health, or, you know, a lot of those kinds of things. But I think if I'd known about more timing techniques, I knew about some back then, but I didn't know about like zodiacal releasing, for example, and I didn't know about perfection years. And now it's almost like I love having that sense of like, oh, I can plan for this perfection year, because, you know, I've got 12 months ahead and I'm thinking about it. And like, you know, I've gone back over and looked at solar returns from so many of those different transits. I think it went over my Neptune first, then my Jupiter, then my Venus, then my Mercury. And I was very much like, yes, I am done. But I also feel like for anybody that's interested in self-development, I feel like I've got a lot of that experience to kind of share with other people, you know, like a problem shared is a problem halved. Like, and I think, yeah, just being open to the idea that like lots of things can happen in your life, and it's like, whatever those things that have happened, it's okay. You're not the only person out there. There is like a community that can kind of like support through this, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think it was definitely a powerful time. I am grateful that it's not going through my seventh house again.
Yeah. 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 And Pluto, I think it can get like, it's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I
No.
think it does get a little bit of a bad rap in that it's
Yeah.
not like, it doesn't have to be so scary, or I don't know. I feel like if we can embrace change, then it's like
Mm.
can be really helpful, like you said, and like fortify,
Yeah.
who
It's
you are.
funny, isn't it? Like it can almost be like energizer. I don't know if that's just like my own chart, but because it's so authentic, isn't it, Pluto? It's just like, it's literally this or this, and you know, it can be so dynamic in the way that it shows up in your life. It's like you can't ignore it, you have to look at that stuff. And there's something I really value about that authenticity of like, whoa, that was, you know, that was scary, or that like really took me into a place of, you know, maybe fears or shame or something like that. But without that experience, I wouldn't be here today. So like, you know, that what was it back in 2020, was it Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto were conjunct?
Yeah,
Is it 20? Yeah,
I think it wasn't that the Great Conjunction.
that's it. Yeah, was it
End of
Saturn?
2019, maybe. Yeah, I think it was Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto,
Yeah,
or maybe not.
it
Yeah,
was.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
why can't I think of
I
it?
wasn't into astrology yet then.
It's Mercury
That's my
retrograde.
cop out.
I just remember that like there was this big conjunction happening in
Yeah.
2020, and it was right on my Mercury at 22 degrees of Capricorn.
Mm.
And I was just like, that was the time where my mental health was really poor at that point. And I was like, I remember going to the doctors and being like, please help me. And they were just like, yeah, we can give you these tablets. And I was like, but I don't want to not feel anymore. I really don't want to not feel. I remember walking away from that appointment and I was really sad, and I was like looking up at the sky and I was just like, wow, the moon's so beautiful, but I feel really bad about life. And I was like, but this is what it is. It's like I need more than somebody saying, you know, here's a pill. And that's not to say that pills aren't great. Like for some people in some situations, like totally. But for me, I was like, I need to unpack this. I need to not just put a plaster on it, but I need to understand why I've gone into this place of feeling like, you know, dark, and like things felt very heavy. And like when you've got Pluto on your Mercury, your mind is going to feel heavy. And it's like Pluto likes to shine a light on like where things are no longer serving us, doesn't it? And what's no longer working. And it's like the way that I was thinking about myself, you know, there was stuff around how I felt about like my physical appearance. And like, you know, I think I was having therapy for like an eating disorder at the time. And it's really weird because now I reflect back on that time and I'm like, oh my God, I feel so differently about all of those things in the list of what felt tricky at that time in comparison to now, where Pluto's doing a dance somewhere else. But in that moment, I was just like, oh my God, this is so hard. And I felt so alone as well. I think that's another thing about Pluto. It can make you feel like, because it is that fear, shame, scary, sometimes stuff, deep transformation, you can feel lonely. It's a bit like a Saturn transit as well. But I think that's why it's important, like for me, definitely to find like a community of people that are into the language of astrology, where you can kind of share and bounce ideas off each other. And, oh, what was that experience like for you when Pluto went over this? You know, that'll never happen in my lifetime. You know, what's that like for you? And, you know, when you do readings for people and you realize that they've had certain transits that you'll never have, and like, wow, that's really fascinating to like see the detail of how that all worked. And my favorite thing that like Nightlight Astrology ever taught us was that Pluto means riches, like the etymology of it is that it's riches. And that is like, that is so beautiful. But I mean, I've got the moon trine Pluto, so like Pluto is, I usually feel fairly good on a Pluto day, you know, not so good on a Mars day, because, you know, I've got a daytime chart and Mars is, you know, in Scorpio doing its merry dance. But I quite generally, touch wood, I quite like Pluto. I find it a very useful archetype. Yeah,
my moon is within like 9 degrees of Pluto too, so I feel that too, like a familiar, it's comfortable in some way, even though it's like very uncomfortable, it's comfortable. So
it's like, it's very authentic, isn't it? So at least you know that what you're experiencing right now is, you know, just the truth of it. I really hate it if people are like saying one thing to my face, but I feel something else going on underneath, because I'm like, I'm not interested in having this conversation. Like I can think of stuff going on in my own life right now where I'm like, I can't continue this relationship because what you're saying is like this billboard, and behind the billboard is this like total car crash scenario that you are not even interested in looking in. And for some people, that's what they're choosing to do in their life, and that's fine, you know, like, yeah, great, get on with it. But for me, like, I need to feel into the depths of something. And, you know, that's why I married a Scorpio, because I was just like, Pluto and Scorpio can be quite similar. And I was like, at least I know this is authentic in comparison to, you know, these relationships that perhaps were much more the billboard than and the rubbish that's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're really similar in that way. I feel that 100%. I also married a Scorpio, so yeah, we have tons of chart synastry between us.
I love that. Like, and do you find that, like, when you do readings for people, do you find that you're like, oh my god, like, this is why I can see why they've chosen me for the reading, or, you know, why I, you know, why this connection is happening? I love looking at that. I love synastry. It's fascinating.
It is. Yeah, I love it too. I find I get a lot of like Pisces placements, a lot of what else? Virgo is a really common. I'm a Pisces rising, so then
that's right. Yeah.
House, but
I find it's funny because when I'll put a post out on Instagram, like if I do a series and it's all the different signs, I love to track the stats of the different signs. And I get very few Virgos, in fact. Like, that's interesting. Like, Virgo is my third house, as my IC as well. So it's very hidden. But I get a lot of connections to Gemini, which is weird actually, because that's my 12th house. Gemini, Scorpio, and Capricorn, but also Pisces. Yeah, absolutely. And they're part of what's busy in my chart as well. Yeah, like, synastry is just fascinating. And there's another thing that I do as well. Like, when I'd start a reading with somebody, like, quite often, not always, but quite often, I'll check what's rising at just before the meeting starts. And it's really interesting because it often has like the ruling planet of whatever zodiac sign is rising at the beginning of the meeting, often has a lot to do with like their line of inquiry, and, you know, what they're actually, even if they're saying something else to begin with, you get like 30 minutes in and they're like, actually, I really wanted to talk about, you know, children or something, and you're like, oh, okay, there it is, you know. And it's do you find that?
I haven't looked at that as much, but I've been looking at where the moon is and like what house that's transiting, and that has been very consistent too, where it's like,
that's so cool. I love that. I forgot what I was going to say, but I'm going to try and remember, because that's really good. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So do you, I'm really interested in looking at horary. Have you ever looked into that?
I haven't studied it at all. It's very interesting to me. Maybe someday, you know, there's so much to study, it's hard to pick.
I know, it's so crazy, isn't it? And I think, I heard something today on Instagram of like, oh, this means this in horary, and I was like, ooh, I like the sound, like I like the phrasing of that. And I find it bizarre. And all of, like, you know, the last couple of years, when something big happens in my life, I'll literally open up the astrology app on my phone and like screenshot the chart. And I keep forgetting to label them, but I was like, in years to come, I'm gonna like go back and look at, like, once I've learned horary, I'm gonna go back and see like, oh, how did that, you know, play out from this chart? And, you know, all I know is that the first house seems to have something to do with it. But I'm fascinated by horary. I'd love to look into that maybe when the kids are definitely established at school and I've got more time.
It's really hard to pick like where. So we've got the basics down, and I mean, obviously you've had them down for a long time. But that's like definitely in my mind now of like what's next. And you know, I'm content where I am, like, you know, just trying to really the basics and get really good at them, but also like always trying to think about what's on the horizon, and whether it's like fixed stars or horary or the asteroids, you know, there's just so many rabbit holes.
So that's what I love about astrology, don't you? Like, there will never not be something to learn. And Yeah, I think you've got like a lot of Jupiter in your chart or a lot of Mercury. Like you need that constant, like, you know, awe-inspiring like sense of wonder, you know, and like, oh, what's next? And it's funny because when you say, like, I've obviously had them down for a long time. In terms of psychological astrology, I have, but in terms of Hellenistic, I have had to rework how it all makes sense in my mind. So I do feel like I've had to learn a new way of like playing the music of the stars and like reading the sheet music and all of that kind of stuff. And it's definitely been this really like, oh, at times it's felt suffocating because I'm like, I'm just going to jump to psychological astrology. And now I'm like, I'm getting more confident with the idea of like, no, like the Hellenistic stuff, it just hits different, doesn't it? And I love the fact that it's got that really ancient history to it, and that people have been using this like pretty much since the dawn of time. I mean, don't even get me started why, like, you know, in society, like perhaps astrology isn't like seen as this, oh, I don't know, respectable thing or something like that, probably because it works too much and people are scared of it. That seems to be like, you know, that's my gut feeling on the issue. But you hear of like government, like politicians and stuff, and they will go for elections on set. They will have an astrologer who like sets the date to do a thing, and you know, like big important people in the world will do things like guided by the, I mean, how do you get that job? That's what I want to know.
Right.
Astrologer for the king or whatever.
Or Beyonce or like, you know, it's always she definitely has someone.
Absolutely. And there's that whole thing, isn't there, about is she a Libra rising or something, or is she not a Libra rising? I'm sure that's been a thing that's been discussed on the astrology podcast.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Well, why don't you tell us a bit before we wrap up, if you want to talk a little bit about where we can find your work, like how we can book with you?
Sure. So I tend to book, my books are kind of for one-to-one readings. I'm available for those. I've got about a month wait at the moment on those, but you can find me on freyastrology.com. And my Instagram is Freyja Astrology with an underscore between Freyja and astrology. So definitely open for one-to-one readings, solar return charts or natal charts, zodiacal releasing, which is just so exciting. And then the one-to-one tuition, which I've just started up. So I'm going to gradually build up how many of those spaces I'm offering out. But I've definitely got a space or two available to offer the one-to-one tuition, which is where we meet once a month or once a fortnight, and gradually work our way through, you know, the basic understanding of Hellenistic astrology. And we can take it as far or as kind of, you know, keep it as succinct as you like. I'm excited by that it's for absolute beginners. Or it's for advanced people that really want to get into the nitty gritty of, like zodiacal releasing, for example, which I just class as like one of those things. There's so much information involved that it's like, whoa, that's a vast topic, but I'm excited to like, share that with people. And then I'll be starting the group at some point. But I'm still feeling my way into that with the Chiron feeling behind me. So I will be starting a group, but it will be global as well. And that's the great thing about the pandemic, isn't it? Like everything is available online, and I really love that. So many of my customers are from the US or from Australia, and I really love being able to connect with people all over the world. Don't feel that like, you know, there's any limits to like the borders of the countries. Like I love meeting people from all over, and I would love to read for you. Whoever you are, come along, book a reading. Be exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is just great. I would love to do this more.
Yeah, it would be really nice, wouldn't it? Just have like a call every week and just catch up on astrology. I love it. There's so much to learn. It's really exciting. It's always nice chatting to you. And like you say, the synastry between our charts, it always just feels really easy to talk and share about this thing that we both have an absolute passion about, the astrology.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I look forward to chatting again soon.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye. For more information about Freyja's work, you can check out her website, freyjaastrology.com. She offers one-on-one readings there. She has her 2024 Astrology Almanac available at a very steeply discounted price. I think she also has a free Saturn and Pisces workbook available there for anyone who's curious. So definitely check that out. She's also on Instagram as Freyja_astrology, and I'll have that all linked here on the screen. For more information about my work, you can find me at byjoveastrology.com, on Instagram at byjoveastro, and on Twitter at byjoveastrology.